He'll not last the night, and we've no room for a dying man who can't pay, the innkeeper said, but Tabitha was already pulling the half-frozen stranger in out of the snow by his shoulders, because she could not do otherwise and live with herself. The blizzard had buried the village to its windowsills. The stranger had come stumbling out of the white dark an hour past midnight, his coat torn, blood frozen black at his temple, his horse long since fallen somewhere on the moor road. He had got as far as the inn door and collapsed against it, and now he lay senseless on the flagstones of the sign of the Holly while the innkeeper, Tabitha's master, scowled down at him and counted the cost of a stranger's funeral. He has no purse on him, the innkeeper went on. Footpads got it, like as not, or he gambled it away. Either road, he's nothing to us. Put him in the stable if you must, but I'll not waste good firewood on a corpse. I'll waste my own wages on him then, Tabitha said, and got her arms under the stranger and would not be moved. She was only the maid of all work. She had no people, no dowry, no prospect in the world but to scrub the floors and serve the ale and grow old at the sign of the Holly until her back gave out. But her mother, dead these 10 years, had taught her one thing before she went, that a person is measured not by what they have, but by what they give when they have nothing, and that you tend the stranger at your door as you would be tended, and ask no questions, and expect no thanks. So Tabitha half carried the wounded man up the narrow stair to her own tiny room beneath the eaves, the only room she could put him in without paying her master for it, and she laid him in her own narrow bed, and she lit her own small fire with her own carefully hoarded wood, and she sat up the rest of that howling night, frozen blood from his brow, and pressing warmth back into his blue hands and praying to a God she half believed in that the stranger would see the morning. He saw it. Toward dawn the fever broke and his breathing steadied, and as the grey light crept into the eaves he opened his eyes, dark and confused, and looked at the plain young woman bent over him. Where, he managed. The sign of the Holly, in Ashmere village, and you're alive, which is a near thing, and no thanks to the weather. She held a cup of warmed broth to his cracked lips. Slow. You've a knock on the head, and you near froze to death on the moor. What's your name, stranger? He hesitated, and she did not notice the hesitation, being busy with the broth. Pen, he said, just Pen. Well, just Pen, you're a great deal of trouble. Drink. He stayed 11 days. The blizzard sealed the village from the world, and the stranger called Pen was too weak to be moved in any case, and so Tabitha tended him through it. She gave up her room and slept on a pallet by the kitchen hearth, and told no one, least of all her grumbling master, that she did it. She brought the stranger broth and bread from her own portion, which meant she went a little hungry, and she made nothing of it. She mended his torn coat with her own needle by candlelight, the fine dark wool of it puzzling her a little, for it was better cloth than any she had handled, but she asked no questions, because her mother had taught her not to. And as he mended they talked. He was not what she expected. She had thought him a gambler or a runaway, given the state of him, but his speech was educated and his manner, even flat on his back and penniless, had something quiet and commanding in it that he could not quite put off. He asked her about her life, really asked, the way no one ever had, and listened to her answers as though they mattered. She told him about her mother, and the lesson about giving, and the long grey days of the inn, and the small dreams she had given up so long ago she could speak of them without grief, a little garden, a window that caught the morning sun, a person of her own to be kind. You have given up a great deal, he said one evening, watching her by the fire, for a woman who keeps giving so much away. I've nothing to give but the giving, she said simply. It costs me little and it's mine to spend. My mother said it was the only wealth the poor are allowed, so we ought to spend it freely. She smiled at him. You'll think me a fool. No, he said, and there was something strange and intent in his dark eyes. I think you the least foolish person I have ever met. I think I have spent 36 years among people who possess everything and give nothing, and I have ridden into a snowbank and been saved by the first person in my life who possesses nothing and gives everything. He looked away, into the fire. I am not certain I deserved the saving. That's not for you to decide. Tabitha said briskly, taking up his coat to finish the mending. A body in the snow gets pulled in. That's all. There's no deserving in it. He watched her stitch his fine coat with her rough needle, and he said nothing for a long while, and Tabitha did not see the way he looked at her, because she never thought to look for such a thing on a man's face when it was turned toward her. On the 12th morning the snow stopped, and the road opened, and a man must go. Tabitha gave him back his mended coat and a parcel of bread for the road, the lost of her own week's bread, and she walked him to the inn door where she had first dragged him in from the storm. The village glittered white and clean under a hard blue sky. "I have no way to pay you," the stranger said at the door. "You know that. I had no purse when I came, and I have none now." "I never asked for one," said Tabitha. "Go on with you, and mind the moor road, and don't go falling off any more horses." He looked at her then, a long look, as though he were memorizing her plain face, her chapped hands, her threadbare gown. "Tabitha," he said, "if I told you who I truly am, you would not believe me, and you would think I mocked you. So I shall not tell you. But I want you to remember one thing." His voice was very quiet. "You were kind to me when you thought me no one. When you believed I had nothing in the world and never would, you gave me your bed and your bread and your fire and your week's wages and asked for nothing back. I shall not forget it. Whatever becomes of me, I shall not forget you as long as I live. You've a head wound, just pen. You're still half feverish." She pushed the bread parcel at him to hide that her eyes had gone unexpectedly hot. "Go home, wherever home is." He took her chapped hand and bowed over it, exactly as though she were a great lady and he a courtier, and pressed his lips to the back of it, and then he was gone, walking out across the white road toward the coach that would carry him to the next town, and Tabitha stood in the doorway watching until he was a dark speck on the snow, and then nothing, and then she went inside and scrubbed the floor and told herself it was only a stranger, and that strangers go, and that she had known he would go. The weeks passed. The thaw came. The sign of the holly went back to its grey ordinary days, and Tabitha served the ale and scrubbed the floors and tried not to think of a dark-eyed stranger who had listened to her as though she mattered. She had no reason to think she would ever know his right name or see his face again. People like her did not get such things. She knew that. She had always known that. She did not know that 100 miles to the south, in the great house of one of the oldest names in England, the Duke of Pendrake had come home half dead from a journey he had undertaken in disguise to see for himself the management of his northern estates, the better to know how his tenants truly lived, and had been set upon by footpads on the moor road, and had been saved from the snow by a poor inn maid who never learned his name. She did not know that the Duke of Pendrake, who had spent 15 years besieged by women who saw only his title and his fortune, who had grown so weary of being valued for what he had that he had nearly given up believing anyone could value him for himself, had found in 11 snowbound days the one thing he had despaired of ever finding, a person who had been good to him for no reason at all, expecting nothing, not even knowing there was anything to expect. She did not know that he thought of her every day. It was full spring, the hedgerows white with May, when the carriage came to Ashmere. It was no ordinary carriage. It was a great glossy thing drawn by 4 matched greys, with a coat of arms on the door and outriders in livery, and it swept up the muddy village street and stopped before the sign of the Holly, and the whole village came running, and the innkeeper rushed out, wringing his apron and bowing before he even knew who he bowed to. Tabitha was on her knees scrubbing the taproom floor when the door opened and the light changed. She looked up, brush in hand, and there in the doorway, dressed now in dark superfine that fit him like nobility, his head healed, his bearing no longer disguised by weakness or rough clothes, but standing plain and commanding for all to see, was the stranger she had called Just Pen. She knew him at once, and she did not at first understand. "You," she said, getting slowly to her feet, the scrubbing brush forgotten in her wet hand. "You came back. Are you well? Did your head—" "My head is mended, thanks to you." His dark eyes had not left her face. "Tabitha, there is a thing I did not tell you, the morning I left, because you would not have believed it, and I could not bear you to think I mocked you." He stepped into the low tap room, and behind him the liveried footman stood at attention, and the innkeeper's mouth hung open, and the whole village pressed at the windows. My name is not Pen, that is, it is, in part. I am Pendrake. I am the Duke of Pendrake, and these are my lands, and I was travelling them in disguise to see my tenants' lives with honest eyes when the footpads left me dying in your snow. The room went utterly silent. The innkeeper made a sound like a kettle. Tabitha stood very still, the cold scrubbing water dripping from her brush on the floor she had just cleaned. "You're," she said, "you're the Duke." She looked down at herself, at her wet apron and her chapped red hands and her threadbare gown, and a terrible scalding flush of shame went over her. "And I put you in my own bed in the eaves, and I fed you common bread. And I called you just Pen and told you to mind the moor road." She pressed the back of her hand to her hot face. Oh, you must have laughed at me. All those days. The maid who thought you a runaway gambler. Stop. His voice was sharp, and then it gentled at once, and he crossed the taproom and stood before her, this Duke, in his fine dark coat and the village watching, and he did the thing no one in that room would ever forget. He went down. He went down on one knee on the wet stone floor that she had been scrubbing, before the maid, in front of the whole gaping village, and he took her chapped red hand in both of his as though it were the most precious thing in England. "Do not be ashamed," he said, low and fierce, looking up at her. "Do not you dare be ashamed before me, Tabitha, not ever. You did not know I was a duke. That is the whole of it. That is everything." His voice was unsteady now, the great calm voice of the Duke of Pendrake breaking plainly in front of all his people. "Do you not understand what you gave me? I have been a duke since I was 19 years old. From that day to this, every kindness I have ever been shown was bought. Every smile, every soft word, every offer of a bed or a meal or a heart, all of it paid for in advance by my title and my fortune. I had come to believe there was no one alive who would be good to me for nothing." His grip tightened on her hand. "And then I crawled half dead to your door, with no purse and no name and nothing in the world, and a poor maid I had never met gave me her bed and her fire and her own week's bread and her own wages, and sat up 3 nights keep me alive, and asked nothing and expected nothing, and did not even know there was anything to expect. You were kind to me when you thought me no one. Do you know how long I have waited to be loved as no one? My whole life, Tabitha, my whole life." Tears were running down her face now, and she could not stop them, and she did not try. "I made you a promise at this very door," the Duke went on, still on his knee, still holding her hand before the whole astonished village. "I said that whatever became of me, I should not forget you as long as I lived. I have not forgotten you for a single day. I have tried to put you from my mind, because the whole world would tell me a duke cannot marry an inn maid, and I have found that I do not care one whit for what the world would tell me, because the world has never once been good to me for nothing, and you have." He drew a breath. "I have not come back to thank you, Tabitha. I have come back to ask you to be my wife, to come and have your little garden, and your window that catches the morning sun, and a whole great house full of people to be kind to come and be a duchess, not because I wish to raise you up, but because you are already, in the only way that has ever mattered, the finest person I have ever known, and I should be the one raised up by the having of you." The scrubbing brush slipped from Tabitha's hand and clotted on the stone. "You can't," she whispered. "I'm the maid, I've nothing. I'll shame you before all your grand." "You will honor me before all of them," he said, "and any one of them who says otherwise will answer to me." He pressed his lips again to the back of her chapped hand, the way he had at the door in the snow, and this time he did not let go. "Say yes, I beg you." The Duke of Pendrake, who has been begged by half of England, is on his knees on a wet floor begging an inn maid. Say yes, and let it be the kindest thing you ever did, and the first kind thing you do that I am able, for the rest of my life, to repay. And Tabitha, the inn maid of the Sign of the Holly, who had pulled a dying stranger in from the snow because she could not do otherwise and live with herself, who had given everything she had to a man she believed had nothing, looked down through her tears at the Duke kneeling on her clean floor, and remembered her mother's voice, understood at last that the only wealth the poor are allowed had been, all along, the very thing that bought her the whole world. "Yes," she said. "Oh, you great foolish man, get up off my floor. Yes." The village erupted. The innkeeper fainted clean away and no one caught him. The Duke of Pendrake rose to his feet and gathered the Maid into his arms in front of God and Ashmere and everyone, and held her as though he had been cold his whole life, and only now come in from the snow. They were married in the village church that summer, by Tabitha's particular wish, so that the people who had known her as the maid of all work could see her wed, and she would not let her old master be turned away, though she did insist, with a glint her new husband adored, that he served the ale at the wedding breakfast for once in his life. The Duke gave her a garden and a window that caught the morning sun, exactly as he had promised, and a great house full of people who came in time to love their kind Duchess as much as he did. And the Duke of Pendrake, who had despaired of ever being loved for himself, spent the rest of his long life beside the woman who had been good to him when she thought him no one at all, and told her so every single day, and counted himself, of all the great men in England, the only one who had ever been truly, freely, and forever rich.